live long and prosper. So in this video series, I'm going to be talking through the social justice elements of every episode of the original series of Star Trek. The thing that inspired this project was actually a Fox News article which argued that Star Trek has in some way betrayed its traditional commitment to sort of political neutrality or middle ground by embracing progressive politics. In this series, we're going to see that Star Trek has always embraced progressive politics, and it's always been aspirational for social justice in various senses. I am taking a broad perspective on social justice here, so that may include multiple different types of social justice, whether that's racial, whether that's economic, whether that's religious, whether that's abilities, gender and sexuality, anything broadly considered. I will go through every episode. Some of the episodes I will interview fellow Trekkies and talk with them about it. And then below, in the descriptions, I will give you additional information about the episodes, particularly their original air date, who wrote the screenplay, and who directed that episode. I also want to dedicate this series to my dad, Michael Allen Zapkin. He was an OG Trekkie from back in the day, and it was watching the original series with him that I came to love Star Trek. All right. So in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the episode The Apple, and I'm joined by Lew Lazarow, my good friend and fellow Trekkie. Lew, thanks for being here.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure.
I'll let Lew introduce himself, and then he will give us a brief summary, and then we'll jump into some of the social justice aspects of The Apple.
Well, hi, everybody. Glad to be back here again. This is actually my second trip round in the Star Trek series. Thrilled to be back again, and thanks, Phil, for having me. My background, I spent 27 years as a classroom educator between college and high school, and then back to college again, English education. I retired from that just a couple of years back, and now I am the interim director of the Penn State University All Sports Museum, which is about as dramatic of a shift as you can possibly make in terms of career choices, but hey, it is what it is. As Phil mentioned, I certainly count myself among the Trekkies of the world. I've been a fan for, I'll go with literally my entire life of Trek specifically and science fiction in general. So the opportunity to have any conversation about sorts of stuff like this is just about heaven as far as I'm concerned. So let's talk about The Apple, shall we? Which weirdly enough, I won't say that it ranks among my favorite episodes, but it is probably one of the earliest episodes that I can remember seeing. So that kind of imprinted on me, which is one of the reasons why I really wanted to talk about it, because it's probably one of the episodes that I've known the longest. So what happens in The Apple? Basically, we've got your sort of standard away team mission where all the significant members of the crew beam down to what appears to be an Edenic planet, and then promptly discover that it's filled with horrible fatal traps that begin offing red shirts like crazy. So they're kind of confused. They've been ordered to investigate this planet by Starfleet because of some anomalous readings that a ship passing by has noted. So they beam down with instructions to contact the local inhabitants. Automatically, we should be wary about how this episode is going to go. They discover that the inhabitants are basically a primitive tribe that they worship and take care of a creature by the name of Vol. And that evidently Vol has some ulterior motives that involve the destruction of the Enterprise and killing the entire crew. So they managed to 4 red shirts, which is a pretty high body count for a Star Trek episode.
Yep.
They try to have conversations about things with the tribe. The tribe seems so primitive as to not really even understand basic things like reproduction. Their entire culture is built around serving Vol and being cared for by Vol. And the Edenic planet, which they repeatedly refer to as some kind of paradise, turns out to be less paradisical by the moment. The long and short of the episode, we end up with Kirk authorizing the destruction of Vol before Vol can destroy the Enterprise. Scotty manages to save his job by saving the ship, and the native inhabitants are left without a god to care for and to care for them, and now have to sort of figure out how to do things completely on their own. And Kirk is like, "Done. My work is done here. See you later." And off they go.
One detail I want to add to that plot summary. The native inhabitants of this planet are entirely content with their situations. That
Absolutely.
becomes a big component of the ethical dilemma facing the Enterprise crew.
Yep.
They are in perfect physical health. Like, McCoy checks them out, and
Like
they don't even have any harmful bacteria. Yeah. He's like, I can't even tell you if they're 10,000 years old. They're just like out there living their best,
very best
Polynesian type life with Donald Trump coloring, interestingly enough. Very orange bodies and very white hair. So it just, if you're not picturing this, just picture a whole bunch of Donald Trumps of different ages and genders in a Hawaiian paradise, but they're all happy. So completely unlike Donald Trump in that sense.
In that particular regard, yes.
Anyway, so I had mentioned that there's this ethical dilemma that's really the core element of the episode, which is the big argument between Spock and McCoy. We get that great triangle system of Spock takes one position, McCoy takes the other, and Kirk has to sort of mediate.
Ultimately make a decision.
Yeah. So Spock is like, hey, these people are happy, they're healthy, this society works for them. Yes, it doesn't have freedom and growth and creativity and things like this, but this is a functional society, therefore the Prime Directive applies. McCoy is like, humanoids need freedom, growth, creativity. They need to be in control of themselves. This is an artificially static civilization, therefore the Prime Directive doesn't apply, and Kirk has to decide. And ultimately, as you said, his decision is kind of not an ethical decision regarding how the people of Vol deserve to be treated. It's Vol is destroying the Enterprise, therefore I'm going to destroy the entire foundation of this culture out of self-preservation, which is completely prohibited by the Prime Directive. So let's start with that. So, and I think there's a lot of branches to this ethical dilemma. So let's start with that.
So
where do you fall on this?
So first, let's put it out there just so that everybody is clear. In no way, shape, or form, I think does anybody rate this as one of the better Trek episodes. There are a lot of problems with the way that this is done narratively. It's kind of a mess as far as that. And I think that part of that mess comes from the idea that on the one hand, we have what potentially is a legitimate question to ask, which is what exactly is the nature of this Prime Directive business? Where is the right and the logic of interfering with another culture? Where are those lines drawn? That is then sort of muddied and heightened or subverted, I think, is probably by this let's put the Enterprise in danger kind of a situation, which really almost comes across as being a nonsensical aspect of this, which is unfortunate because I think that there are potentials in the episode that ultimately can't be realized because it's just too much of a. I think it went through one too many rewrites. I think is what we come down to try to create tension where tension didn't really need it to be created. So to the core question then, we do have a really interesting and I think difficult situation, but one that I don't think is completely unknown to our own human civilization, which is more advanced civilization comes into contact with less advanced civilization. Less advanced civilization is doing perfectly well on its own, but could, by their definition, do better by their terms. And that seems to be what it is that Kirk, as a representative of Starfleet, seems to be bringing as far as their baggage, right? Starfleet is like, well, our responsibility is to spread the wealth, as it were. We're uplifting, right? We're bringing other people with us. So the Kirk spends a lot of time during the episode blaming himself. Oh, this is my fault. If I had only done this or if I had only done that, then, people wouldn't have died or wouldn't be endangered, But ultimately, I kind of feel, I don't know, right or wrong, but I kind of feel bad for Kirk because Starfleet is the one that has put him in this, right? He's following these orders by essentially what are seemingly, as portrayed in this episode, imperialists, right? I mean, they're driving their own culture outward to say, hey, we do it better, therefore you should do it our way. And I know that a lot of commentators with regard to this episode have kind of mentioned the fact that while there may be some level of justification to say, we do it better, therefore let us offer you what it is that we have to try to make your lives or improve your lives, to make it better. But there's this sort of like opposite end of things where if you just say, well, we removed the thing that we thought was bad in your life, and now good luck figuring, out the rest of it, because now you don't have this, subterranean computer system that's going to control the weather and grow all your food for you and protect you and do all of those other things. And now you're going to have to basically figure it out kind of all on your own. And that feels dirty. That feels like we kicked in the door of your house and told you need to do better and then turned around and left. Although there is a moment where Kirk does say, he's got that one little line in there is like, and we're going to help you. And one of the things that he requests, of course, is that a team comes down, but he doesn't say that the team is coming down to educate, right? He said they're going to go down and penetrate the bowels of Vol and kind of see what it is that's going on underneath the surface, which sounds a whole lot more like we want to know what's going on down there. But
this is high tech we can steal,
right? Potentially, right? Which isn't that the imperialistic way, right? You've got a thing, we want the thing, we're going to knock over your house and then take what it is that we want for our own instead of sort of sharing any of that. So it's a really uncomfortable episode in terms of, frankly, the way that Starfleet is portrayed. And I'm really glad that later on, both through the original series and then into Next Gen, they really do a lot of clarification on the Prime Directive about why it is that this is totally not an okay thing that we're doing here. Like this episode kind of shines as oh, by the way, Prime Directive, this is totally not a really good example of that. This is kind of the opposite of it. This is pretty much, we take what we want and we don't really care so much about you. But what that does, I think, speak to overall, sort of evolution of Prime Directive regardless, I think one of the enduring things that Trek kind of digs its heels in against is utopian existences. I don't. They don't like. They write against utopia, right? They are consistently pointing out what appears to be utopia, and then kind of turning it. And the argument often is the whole for man's reach must exceed his grasp, or what's a heaven for, right? If we're not consistently working and striving towards something greater, then we're either stagnating or we're actually slipping backwards, right? There can be no perfect sort of stasis situation, right? There's got to be that level of tension, that level of disruption, even if that ultimately means we're actually going to learn how to kill each other that seems to be preferable to stasis.
Yeah. So, okay, you brought up a ton of good stuff there.
I always do.
No, and I appreciate that. So I think that last point actually is really, really interesting, and I want to talk about that for just a minute. Yeah, definitely there is this consistent theme. Like, which movie is it with Spock's half brother?
Oh, the fifth one,
The
right?
fifth one. Yeah, I always
The finding God at the end of the universe, right?
yeah, I always think it's 5, but then I always think that I'm wrong about that. So yeah, I mean, like, there's that great moment in the fifth one where Spock's half brother, whose name escapes me, is like, I can take away your pain, and McCoy is like, oh, I no longer feel this tremendous guilt, and then Kirk is like, no, I need my pain,
I need my
because
pain.
that's what makes us human, and that, I think, is kind of the ethos of a lot of these episodes. Is like, yeah, we could live under Vol. We could live under Apollo in Who Mourns for Adonais. We could live in these ideal societies. Even the series pilot, The Cage. I mean, Christopher Pike could live in these great worlds with uh the what's her name? The woman that the aliens have as well. Like, he could live in these great imaginary worlds, whatever it is. And there's just this continual refusal to. And I think that's really interesting because, sure, I get the like, utopia is always a fiction element of it, and I think that's fine. It's interesting as far as it goes. But what I find even more interesting about that idea is the sort of implicit assertion that because utopia is a lie, the world we live in some ways the best of all possible worlds.
Mm-hmm.
But that also exists in stark contrast to the reality of the 1960s, and even to the reality of today, of the 2020s. Like, this is a society that has done away with money. This is a society that theoretically has done away with racism, sexism, classism. This is this is in many ways a utopian type of society from the perspective of the social problems of the 1960s and the social problems of today.
Right.
So I think it's an interesting tension that, on the one hand, you've got this sense that we need these problems because these problems are in themselves important, but at the same time, you're also imagining a world without many of the problems facing the society that produced the show.
It seems like there's a level of tension that exists between the idea of what Starfleet has is utopia, right?
Yeah.
Like it's created, a world or a universe that has this kind of sense of harmony because it's done away with all of those social issues.
Yeah.
But then incapable of identifying an endpoint to that progress. Like, what exactly
Yeah.
is the ultimate end of that journey as far as human progress goes? Like, because at some point, right, we'll be finished, right? Like, I mean, we will have achieved like the highest level of, complete transcendence, and we'll know all the things and we'll be all the things. But they seem unwilling to allow the possibility that anybody else has ever gotten there. And if there's any way that it could legitimately happen. I don't think that. I think there's plenty of argument to say that Vol is not it, right? Because Vol is kind of cast in this way of being an overlord, right? And it's this sort of
even physically presented as this giant gaping mouth snake.
Right. It's just intended to be fed. But
and of course, within the Garden of Eden mythology, the role of the snake is significant.
Right. Sure. Of course. The idea, like, I was trying to figure out, right? like I think that the Starfleet crew, I think that the Enterprise crew looks at this relationship as being entirely parasitic, right? That Vol's existence is like, you guys are here to serve me. But then when you look at it, it becomes a little bit more symbiotic, right? The two of them need each other in order to survive, right? So I think that Kirk and his crew are like, nobody should be in the position to feed the beast, right? Like, that's not why you're here. You're not here to feed the beast. But then the beast is like, but I granted you eternal life, and like everything is perfect, and you live in an idyllic existence where you don't have to worry about anything and nothing is trying to kill you. Like, what more did you want? Like, am I not a benevolent God, right, that has done all these things for you? And then, of course, we get into, as a result of that Star Trek routinely has it in for organized religion as a general rule, right? So you can't have utopia, but you can't have an organized religious structure, because science is king, right? And religion is a horrible thing that does all kinds of terrible things to its people. But okay, so make it not a religion, right? Fine, we'll tear the religious piece out of it, and we're not going to call it a religion. But then Vol stands just as equally well as a government, right? You know, you feed the government by, I don't know, paying taxes. Then the government is going to do these things for you so that you can keep on pay. Like, it's going to keep you safe so that you keep paying taxes so that it keeps you. Like, this is the reality of
or indeed Starfleet itself.
Or indeed Starfleet
you
itself.
serve Starfleet, and it gives you food, it gives you purpose, it gives you organization, etc., etc.
Right. It gives you the opportunity to go out and explore strange new worlds, right? I mean,
blow up other people's snake gods.
Absolutely. So, like, where is the problem with that symbiotic relationship? Because we have institutions. In theory, those institutions are created by people to serve people, and that people support those institutions so they get the benefit of those services and realize that they have to give something of themselves in order for those institutions to continue to function. And as long as the institution keeps giving back to its people the way that it's supposed to, in equal measure, right? So equal to what I give is what it is that I should expect back in return in terms of services and protection and whatever else it is that things are set up. And that entity, that institution, respects me, respects who I am, allows me to exist. As long as I obey the rules and don't harsh anybody else's existence, then we've achieved the level of symbiosis. And that seems to be what it is that Vol accomplished, right? I mean, Vol set up a really cool symbiotic relationship where those people don't have to worry about anything, because Vol takes care of them, and all they got to do is reciprocate and take care of Vol. And somehow, like, you know, Kirk is, you know, like, well, or at the very least, McCoy, right? McCoy is like, this is, you know, where's the progress? You know, where's the, and Kirk is like, yeah, I think I'm going to listen to that guy, because these people don't have sex.
That definitely comes up repeatedly. That's also, I think, worth talking about. But that's the way you just put that, I think, is really, really interesting, because as you were talking, I was thinking, that's John Locke, that's Jean-Jacques Rousseau, that's John Stuart Mill, these like foundational thinkers of classical liberal philosophy and like what society should be set up to do to respect individual rights while also providing security. The idea of the social contract.
Yes.
And I mean, this society has entered into a social contract with Vol. As far as we can tell, until the Enterprise crew shows up and knocks everything out of balance.
Right.
That social contract works perfectly well for everybody involved. And that's definitely Spock's point, is this is more of a symbiotic relationship than a parasitic relationship. Because ultimately, so people of Vol give up these sort of abstractions of creativity, freedom,
love.
Sex is less of an abstraction, love more of an abstraction.
Right.
But not every culture necessarily has to place a high value on those things.
Correct.
If this is a civilization, as it seemingly is, that doesn't place a high value on those things, basically what they give up is some fruit that they give to Vol periodically.
Right.
And in exchange, they get perfect health, happiness, they get great weather, they get all this stuff. Yeah, it isn't that bad a trade unless you subjectively assign your particular values as the Enterprise crew, and McCoy in particular.
Yep. It also seems like if there doesn't seem to be, it seems to be a manufactured conflict that Vol decides that the Enterprise has to be destroyed and these people must die. Because it seems like had Vol not acted in a way to draw power from the Enterprise and, you know, try to send it plunging into the atmosphere, that the crew would have just been like, wow, really nice planet that you have here. We just came to check out some weird readings. Is everything okay? And the people would have been like, yeah, cool. We have this relationship. Vol takes care of us. And then that would have been it. But Vol ends up being cast in this snake-like villainous kind of role. Like, ultimately, in order to be the villain, he has to punch first, and he does. And that's where I think the episode gets muddy, because it didn't have to happen that way, right? I mean, there could have been plenty of philosophical issues that allowed for conflict on the planet, as the Enterprise crew is like, wow, how is it possible for you to live this way? But haven't you considered growth or change or expansion, or, you know, what do you think of this? Da, 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 da. I mean, you know, like, have you ever, you know, kind of, you know, the whole, like, to borrow, right, Douglas Adams, you know, trying to, you know, having a conversation with a Vogon, right? And the Vogon's like, I don't need any of that. I just have these real simple things. This is a simple existence, and they're fine with their simple existence, and there's enough there, I think, to work with. But Vol gets cast as the snake, and I'm not sure that characterization ultimately is fair. I don't think that it's reasonable, because the whole way that the snake enters in, right? If we're carrying the Garden of Eden metaphor through, it's that the snake is the one that, you know, whispers in the ear of Eve and says, oh, you should eat the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And then all of a sudden we understand, like, you know, that there's a difference between those two things. But Vol does that based on external forces pressuring, not out of an innate desire to see corruption enter into his own system.
Yeah. Well, so there's a couple of interesting things there. I do wonder whether Vol does see the Enterprise crew as corruption entering the system anyway. I mean, we've had that before, where it's like, you have come from the outside, you're disease, and we need to wipe you out so that the system can remain pure. So it is, I mean, and the Enterprise crew does show up, and Chekhov's all over whoever this woman is, who's never in another episode. So, and the two, like, teenage people of Vol are like, hey, making out looks kind of fun. Let's do that. And Vol is like, thunder from the skies. Don't be making out with one another. So there is that element of maybe Vol's, if Vol conceptualizes them as a threat to the Order, maybe that's not unjustified. But that's also worth thinking about in terms of going back to the colonialism aspect that you had been talking about before, right? So I think this works for the Americas. This works for Australia, New Zealand to a lesser extent. This idea that, like, you get to a place and it's uninhabited. And by uninhabited, you mean millions of indigenous people. and in order to maintain the fiction that it's uninhabited, you declare those indigenous people to be not fully human.
Right.
There is a bit of that here, where it's like, these people aren't living their best human life. They're living as
By our
slaves of a machine, by our definition. Yeah, it's the same kind of thing. It's like when Europeans get to, say, the Americas, they're like, oh, indigenous peoples here aren't doing large-scale industrial manufacturing. They aren't doing major mining operations. They aren't doing this, that, and the other thing that we in Europe consider to be the marks of civilization.
Right.
But then you also have colonists sort of manufacturing justifications for continued aggression against indigenous peoples. The idea of like the murdering savage and all this bullshit that gets used to justify spreading across, say, the western frontiers of the United States or Canada. The idea of the barbaric pagan savage who needs to be sort of forcibly brought to God and whatnot. These things are rather manufactured justifications. And again, we see the same kind of thing here from actually the perspective of the Star Trek authors, in a sense. Like, they are buying into that sort of narrative of like, the indigenous peoples of the area you're trying to colonize will attack you. Because, I mean, there's even that a bit toward the end where Vol is like, all right, people of Vol, you need to kill the strangers. And they're like, we don't know what killing is. And so the lead guy has to, like, teach them on Vol's instructions. You get a heavy stake and you bash them in the head really hard with it. So, and I mean, the Enterprise crew has not sort of attacked the people of Vol, apart from attempting to destroy Vol. So yeah, there is that sort of idea that, like, in the indigenous inhabitants of an area are a threat to the colonizers. And so the colonizers are justified in dealing with that threat through violence.
Yeah. The part of that which makes it awkward is the fact that these elements are just simply they're not well done, right? That in terms of the order in which they're presented, the justification seems to be sort of in short supply. If Vol has this much power, like power enough to be able to completely annihilate one of the red shirts with a bolt of lightning, but then decides that in order to eliminate the rest of them, he needs to teach his feeders how to kill people with sticks. This is messy narration that ultimately unfortunately doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And the fact that, to sort of come back to your earlier point, that that Chekhov and Landon kind of engaged in this sort of like sexual play happens so late in the episode that it doesn't seem to be sufficient justification at that point. Like if they had, honestly, if this was a next gen episode, we would have seen that happen much earlier in the episode, and then have sort of the ripples of that action kind of spread outward as Vol sort of watches as his idyllic sort of like his feeders, become increasingly corrupted as a result of the presence of these things. But this is just like bam, right? And it happens so late in the episode that it almost fails to be an adequate justification. Like, definitely, now I've had enough, right? This kissing business can absolutely not be tolerated, and now we're gonna have to kill you all. It's unfortunate that that the episode gets written in that way, rather than because obviously one of the things that we know from the structure of the episode is that from the get-go, from the minute that they've beamed down, Scotty is already reporting that the antimatter pods are being drained. So they've literally been on the planet for minutes, and Val is already like, there's energy up there, and I'm going to take it for myself, which of course comes across as a hostile act, from the get-go. So I again, not to make too much of it, but again, as a successful episode, this one lacks, quite a number of things. But along those same lines, talking about like the appearance of Chekhov and his relationship with Ensign Landon, there are a couple of interesting things I think that are drawn from that. One, Landon is presented like she kicks some ass. Good for her, right? When they get into that fight, she defends herself equally well as anybody else's, and admittedly, you've got
better than most of the red shirts.
Literally, yeah, right. The red shirts are all toast. 4 body count of 4 in one episode. That's pretty horrible. So Landon is presented as being a very capable individual, even as an ensign, and it's less her gender and more her rank that sort of presents her as being less experienced, which is pretty okay. But she's armed just as everybody is armed, so it's not like, oh, you can't have a phaser, little girl, right? So no, she's as armed and prepared as the rest of them, which is absolutely something that I do appreciate as, from this episode. And then one of the things that I've seen mentioned about this episode is the portrayal of Chekhov. Because this, of course, as many as people will recognize, this is Chekhov's first like major role. Like he had appeared previously in episodes during the second season, but this was the first time that he was really kind of a functional member of the crew. And I saw it commented that Chekhov's character in this episode is like, here's what a young person should be like and act like, if you were an old person trying to figure out what a young person should be like and act like. Because Chekhov is just like running libido. He's got no other sort of like function, right, except to pretend to take scanner readings, get yelled at for taking scanner readings, and then make moves on Landon. And evidently the two of them are dating, which then makes you question Kirk's decision to bring them both down if he perfectly knew well that this was a relationship and maybe that was not a great idea. But I'm fascinated by Chekhov's portrayal. They wanted that youth element, right, to be in there to provide that sort of mirroring image between the feeders and the Starfleet crew, to say, and I guess we're kind of intended to look at Chekhov and be like, you go, man, right? Landon, she's a beautiful woman, and why wouldn't you want to have a relationship with her? And she's obviously attracted to him, and so we're sort of given the benefit or the beauty of love, kind of weirdly, I guess, portrayed by Chekhov and his walking libido.
So that, I mean, Chekhov is definitely an interesting character here. One of the things that they wanted when they cast Chekhov for the second series was they were sort of looking for somebody who would be like Davy Jones of the Monkees. Like that was the specific reference that they gave him the hairpiece. He wears a wig. Walter Koenig at the time, his hair was quite short, he said. And so there's a weird story because when I watched the original series on the Sci-Fi Channel in the early 2000s with my dad, they had cast and crew commentary. Walter Koenig told the story where like he had quite short hair. They wanted somebody who had the sort of mop top Beatles, Monkees look. So they went to costuming, and it was him and like all these NBC executives, and they were just all trying on these wigs to figure out what Chekhov's hair was going to look like. It's this weird, like, no rules in the 60s kind of moment where just like, why are the executives here? Why are they putting on wigs for a character they're not gonna play?
Right.
Yeah, that definitely, that idea of like, because in Who Mourns for Adonais, which is another one of the sort of early episodes where Chekhov plays a central role, we find out that he's 19. I don't know how old Walter Koenig was at the time. This might be like a Radar O'Reilly situation from MASH, where you have a 30-something-year-old actor being like, I'm an 18-year-old. I don't know anything. I've just come off the farm. I don't think I think Walter Koenig was probably in his mid-20s, early 20s. So I don't think he was super far off. But yeah, that idea of like, we've had a whole first season where mostly Kirk is getting the women. We're gonna give it to a younger character this time. But actually, that's an interesting relationship as well, because this is like, you talked about the poor structure of this episode. I think it's a sort of 2-part episode, weirdly, with like the first bit where it's just the crew wandering around this planet, and then the second half where they're interacting with the people of Val. In the first half, where they're just in the garden, Chekhov is continually touching Landon, and continually like, oh, let's have some sexy times in this garden. Yeah, and she's all kind of like, we've got stuff we're supposed to be doing. Maybe there's a time and a place. You can just hold on. Like, when we've figured out how this planet functions, maybe then we can have sex in the woods. And Chekhov seems to kind of be on the let's have sex in the woods now kind of train.
He doesn't even seem to be bothered by the killer flowers and the exploding rocks. Like,
yeah, I mean, like literally one of their friends just got a bunch of thorns shot into his chest. And Chekhov's like, yeah, that's real sad. You want to make out?
It's not good.
But yes, but Landon is definitely, in the first half, like, no, there's some shit going on we need to be paying attention to. And then in the second half, Landon is much more like, yeah, we can make out now. Val's destroying the ship. We're trapped here. Stuff's going crazy. Yeah.
Come on.
Time for smoochies. it is this weird bifurcated element to their relationship that kind of mirrors the structure of the episode. The first half is in the garden where plant life and the exploding rocks are trying to kill them. Then the second half is in civilization with the people of Val, where Val is trying to kill them. I think it's very problematic. Chekhov's sort of sex pest type behavior in the first portion of the episode.
It's odd. I mean, so we understand, based on the whole, Garden of Eden sort of background, that sex plays a role in this, right? It plays a role in the original story, and therefore it has to sort of find its way in here. But the placement of it seems so awkward and so forced, in part because one, it's the 1960s, where this sort of greater sense of sexual liberation is a part of the culture, but at the same time it's locked down because this is network television, and there are things you cannot say and things you cannot do, if you're like broadcasting a network show. So they're trying to express a level of sexual liberation while they're tiptoeing right next to the line, and the censors are there going, you can't do that. Sex is so important to this, but it's so stunted, which is why Kirk ends up just sort of fascinated by the idea that they don't have children. He keeps like twice in the episode, he's like, where are the children? Why don't you have children? Maybe you should have some children. Because that's the closest that he can get to saying, you guys should really be having sex right now. All of you, all the time. which is best characterized by Chekhov and Landon, right? Like, because I'm sure Kirk, as sort of being like ship captain father, is like, there's my boy. That's what people should be doing.
Yeah.
This is the hallmark of civilization. People having sex whenever they want to. Good on you, Chekhov.
Yeah. Well, so the other thing that occurred to me as I was rewatching this episode in terms of reproduction and this society having sex, there's like 30 of them.
Yeah.
There's like 30 of them. Apparently, the entire population of this planet is like a handful of people who, biologically, if we think about it, are probably all related to one another.
I mean, if we're assuming
not
that
a wide gene pool,
right, it is truly not. I mean, obviously, we're left with all kinds of questions about where did these people come from? Did Vol create them? Like, are they clones? Like, what exactly is the situation there? We've got no answers to any of that whatsoever. But if we assume that sort of Vol, existed, and these people are all somehow genetically different, and they're just extended in terms of their life so that they can continue to be the feeders of Vol without question, then reproduction is going to be a real weird thing for them in such a small grouping. Assuming, of course, that genetics, is a thing for them. And their species.
And I mean, in the 60s, understandings of genetics and stuff obviously weren't as advanced as they are today, but. And this is a practical problem among a myriad of practical problems that the Enterprise crew does not deal with.
Not at all.
I think some of the advisors that Kirk once sent down are sex instructors to just teach them, here's how you have sex with one another, because they have no clue. But I imagine Kirk might take that job personally.
He might. I'm sure he'd be very willing to lend a hand more whatever.
But I mean, this is definitely in terms of like, let's destroy Vol and create a functioning society, that is definitely an issue that they did not think through. Like, is this a large enough base population to actually build a successful civilization? I mean, because that's one of the concerns, right, with endangered animals and things, is like, all right, we've got 100 white rhinos left, or 100 Bengal tigers, or whatever it is.
Do we have the genetic diversity? Yeah.
Could we build a sustainable population of those creatures from the number that we have? And sometimes the answer is no. Is this handful of people enough people to sort of create a sustainable civilization?
Right.
Well, and of course that, if we think about it in terms of the story of the Garden of Eden, everybody is starting from just 2 people. So I guess if we're sort of mythologizing how societies grow and spread and diversify,
then sure,
there's well more than Adam and Eve there. So I guess you can build a civilization. But
and assuming that this is not the last time that Starfleet is going to be stopping by, then presumably we're just going to just sort of absorb the feeders into the grand network of the Federation, I suppose. And that, I think, it comes back to this whole prime directive notion and the idea of, should we be allowing this advanced state of technology? Should we be allowing cultures to make their own way, to make their mistakes, to find their own path? The benchmark moment for, as is developed later on, is once you develop warp travel, once you have that, ability to step outside of your own planetary system, that's when contact comes in, and we can all say, hey, howdy, welcome to the universe. And, here we're all out here as well, and we'd love to, sort of welcome you in now that you're technologically advanced enough to be a part of this. But this is wildly different from that. And granting that we're only in second season and there's still development to take place, but frankly, I think the cultural commentary here, again coming from the 60s like this is all too accurate, right? Because if we look at America in the 1960s, right, they weren't interested in leaving those cultures well alone to develop as they will and make their own mistakes, right? It was we're America, and we know how to do it right, and so we're the ones that have to stop you from making these terrible mistakes. And I guess part of that comes from this notion of, weirdly, right, I guess the simultaneous love of and fear of technology, right? The obviously this isn't the first world-running computer that we've come across in Star Trek, and every time computers cannot be trusted to run human affairs, right? They're always going to make some kind of mistake. They're always going to do the wrong thing.
Whereas humans always do the right thing.
Always do the right thing. Exactly. So Vol, it's, darn it, I kind of feel bad for Vol. I feel like Vol had a really good thing going on. And all Vol was asking was, to be, fed exploding rocks as its fuel source. And look what it got instead. I don't know. One of the, as I was doing some thinking and some research for this talk, I came across the fact that there was a follow-up to this episode. DC Comics, when they were doing their Star Trek series run, they actually did a return to this planet, Gamma Trianguli or whatever it is. To like the Enterprise stopped back in to check and see how everybody was doing, and spoiler alert, not well. like the writers were like, this did not go well, right? Shocking, right? That lo and behold, these folks did not do super well when left to their own devices to create their own civilization.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's a shame. I really, there are so many things that you wish that this episode was able to say and do, better. I do still like it, and I do still enjoy it, and I have that nostalgic feel for it, because we get a cool Planet Hell set that is sort of lush and tropical, and we get these sort of nifty aliens that are orangish and their white hair and Polynesian kind of what's going on, and just I just wish it had been written better. That's all. I just wish it had been better.
All right. In the interests of I think we've been going for about 45 minutes or so now.
We do
in the interests of time. Yeah, I think we could probably keep talking about this episode for much, much longer. But I think we're gonna leave it with that.
Seems fair.
Desire that the episode had been written better. I think that's a fine
there's
fine button
there's a
to
point
put on the end of it. Yep. So, all right. Thank you so much, Lew. This was really a great conversation. I appreciate you being here.
It was my pleasure. Absolutely. Always a good time to talk this stuff with you. So,
yeah.